Sorry, Tom.
Does anybody have any changes to the minutes they'd like to make? All right, I motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, moving on to remote participation policy.
Sure. So as far as the remote participation policy, basically we are located in the city of Charlottesville, who is still under a locally adopted state of emergency. So consistent with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, we are continuing to hold meetings remotely for right now until the state of emergency is lifted for Charlottesville, with an option that anybody who chooses could attend in person, but formally the meetings will be conducted electronically. However, outside of the state of emergency, the General Assembly has allowed for an adoption of a remote meeting policy for local bodies to provide some opportunity for them to continue to allow remote participation in certain circumstances. Those circumstances are pretty general, but basically, if you have a health situation that prohibits you from being able to participate in a meeting, or are a caregiver for somebody else who needs medical caregiving that you're providing, if you're traveling, or if there's any sort of other more general personal issue, you would have the opportunity to participate remotely, provided that there is an in-person quorum that still assembles, and then there's a process that you would have to go through. So if you know you will not be able to be in attendance due to one of the allowable reasons, which were listed in the policy that we provided to you, you would notify the chair of the committee and let them know which of those exceptions or situations applies to your situation. And then the quorum, the in-person quorum of the membership would be able to vote to allow your participation, and that would be reflected in the minutes. So it allows up to either 25% of your participation to be done remotely based on the situations that are outlined in the policy, or 2 meetings per year, whichever one is greater. So for you all, since we meet every other month, it would be 2 meetings that you would be allowed to participate remotely. Basically, in order for you all to have this option, we would just need you to adopt the policy. The policy was developed consistent with the regulations that have been outlined by the General Assembly. So we're just offering you all the opportunity to meet remotely. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, basically, you can make a motion to adopt the policy that's presented.
So moved.
I would like to say something briefly. I brought this up at the RTP meeting, I think, but I remain a little bit concerned about item C, that the minutes shall reflect with specificity the nature of the personal matter. I think it'd be strange for me or my family members' medical condition to be recorded in the minutes. That seems like a violation of privacy. So I don't know what specificity means, but I think that's a little strange.
Yeah, and this is basically just reflected by the language that's from the General Assembly. So what I would say is that you wouldn't necessarily have to name the specific condition, but basically just explain, like, I am unable to attend due to providing care for a family member who has an illness, something like that. So not like overly specific, but tells you which of those categories, applies to your specific situation. I think unless we are pushed further on that, I understand the hesitancy and certainly sympathize with that concern.
Well, if that is how it is put into practice, that doesn't bother me.
Sandy, in this remote policy, that's only after Charlottesville lifts its state of emergency. Until then, we're doing remote still, right?
And like I said, we'll officially be holding the meetings remotely, so anybody who wants to participate can, but there's not a requirement for there to be in-person quorum present physically at our location. This would just kick in once we're no longer in a state of emergency.
Okay, thanks. Do you know when Charlottesville's planning to lift it? Sorry.
Tentatively, it sounds like maybe at some point in September, but I don't think that has been decided. I think that's the timeline that we've heard in general discussions.
Okay, thanks. I'll second then.
All right. Looking, sorry, what was that?
Want me to call a roll call vote, or did you just want to vote by hand?
We could do by hand or a roll call, doesn't matter.
Do by hand.
All those for, raise your hand. All right, all those against? All right, looks like it passed unanimously.
Sorry, guys, I'm eating.
I have a question also, in the future, do you want to have the meetings here at the Water Street Center as we used to have them? In person?
That's fine with me.
I'm fine with that.
Works for me.
Where else would they be?
They could be, we could take turns going to each office.
Oh, I see. That'd be fun.
That
but
won't
yeah.
affect them, Murray.
All right, well, I'm looking forward to a presentation from Stephen.
Let me see if I can share my screen. Can everybody see that?
We can say it.
Great. All right. So let's get started then. My name is Stephen Johnson, for those who don't know me well, and I work as the planning manager at JAUNT. And today I was asked to talk a little bit about JAUNT and transportation. So my plan is to take about 15 minutes of my time to try to get through this material to save 10 minutes for questions and discussion. We'll see how well I do that because I'm going to try to talk about a lot. But what I'd like to cover is, what does JAUNT do today and what could JAUNT do tomorrow to establish a baseline for those who are not very familiar with how JAUNT operates. And then I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about how I think of improving transit, particularly using a customer experience framework, because I have a software development background and that's how people make good software. And I think it's pretty interesting and I'd love to get other people's perspective on that. So what does JAUNT do today? Well, JAUNT is a transit provider and we serve 7 localities in Virginia, 6 counties and the city of Charlottesville. Of those, everybody except for Buckingham and Greene County are JAUNT shareholders. So JAUNT is a public service corporation, which means we are not part of any local government. We are an independent corporation, but our shareholders are exclusively local governments and we have a public mandate. I don't know exactly why Buckingham is not a shareholder, but I do know that their financial contribution and service are pretty small. So maybe it was just more trouble than it was worth. Greene County, we started last year. So we assumed management of Greene County Transit and that relationship is still in transition. So I think it's possible that Greene County will become a shareholder in the future. That will be up to the existing shareholders and Greene County to come to an agreement on that. But the shareholders have just a little bit more formal authority in managing JAUNT. They have voting positions on our board rather than non-voting. In terms of the kinds of service that JAUNT operates, our major category is demand response service. So this is service that the customer has to call in at least a day in advance to make a reservation for their trip. There's a negotiation process. If their first request, there's no availability, we might be able to go back and forth and find something else that does work for the customer. But then the goal is by the time they get off the phone, they've got an idea of when their pickup window is going to be and the availability of the trip. The reason that we do require that reservation in advance is that allows us to work more efficiently in a rural service area. So if you think of a county like Louisa that's really big and not very dense, we want to be able to build schedules that are as efficient as possible. So if we collect all that information ahead of time, we can make the best use of those public dollars to operate the service. Within that service, we've really got three categories. Our circulator service connects one area. So an example would be the Crozet circulator or the Louisa circulator. You can get picked up anywhere in that area and dropped off anywhere in that area during the hours of operation. Second type is our link service. So these connect to different places. An example would be our Fluvanna midday that picks up passengers in Fluvanna in the morning, drops them off in Charlottesville and urban Albemarle in the afternoon, or in the morning, and then does the return trip in the afternoon. So that's typical of our link services. They connect two different places and they tend to go one direction in the morning with a return trip later. So that's good for work or running errands in town, etc. Then we've got our ADA service, and this is mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and it's linked to CAT's fixed route service. So the ADA service area is defined as a 3/4 mile buffer around CAT's fixed routes. Our hours of operation have to at least match CAT's, and our price can't be more than double CAT's price. So it's really important that we are coordinating with CAT, because if they expand their service network, that comes with an ADA price for Albemarle and Charlottesville. And if CAT goes fare free, our ADA service also has to go fare free. So that covers our demand response service. Next, we've got our fixed route commuter. These are all of our connect services. We've got 4 of them right now, and these you do not need a reservation. There's a published schedule. You show up when the bus is advertised to be there, and you get on and you're able to ride. So those are the 29 North, Crozet, Buckingham, and Fluvanna connect services. And all of those services are bringing commuters into Charlottesville and urban Albemarle. And then last, we've got our human service agency service. So these are organizations like JABA, Blue Ridge Pace, Logisticare. These are big companies that are doing mostly health services in our region, and they contract with us to help provide transportation for their clients to and from their services. So there's a lot of variety here. We've got 2 to 3 dozen different service types, and if you go on our website, ridejaunt.org, you can learn more about all of those. But that's really unusual. There's a lot of transit agencies that do their fixed route service because that's what they think of as transit. And then they do the ADA because it's mandatory. There's very few areas in the country that have as much variety of rural transit service as we do. And I think that's really cool that JAUNT has built this relationship with all these localities, and we're able to provide transit service for rural communities. So I think we should be proud of ourselves for that. This slide shows a little bit of statistics from fiscal year 20, before our last, mostly normal year before COVID hit. And you can see some of our statistics here. Most of our trips are ADA, and the 18%, that's the link and circulator services, and then connect services, 17% of our trips, and the agency is 24. So mostly ADA, but we do have that rural component as well. So in terms of what JAUNT could do tomorrow, we're here to be a partner with our localities. So really, we can do whatever localities want. Particularly, we hope to help localities reach their access, equity, and environmental objectives. So we're here to be a partner. We don't have an agenda that we want to maximize transit ridership or get more people to stop driving. We're really here to give options to localities and help them achieve their goals. We negotiate separately with each locality, so that's really cool. We give each locality a chance to articulate what their priorities are, and the services that Buckingham would fund would be really different from the services that Louisa or Albemarle will fund. But if you've ever been on either side of a budget negotiation process, you know how difficult that can be. So imagine having to do that 7 times. It's a pretty significant challenge. But if we're doing it well, we want officials, constituents to collaborate to identify what are the best services out there. And then hopefully we can fund those. But we want to set those elected officials up to be the heroes, saying yes to provide a service that's valuable to the community as much as we can. And then my last point here, I think there's an untapped opportunity. We don't have any great examples today of services that were negotiated with multiple localities. So our Buckingham Connect service mostly brings Buckingham employees to Charlottesville businesses. But that exists just because Buckingham said that was a priority. I think you could argue that Charlottesville benefits from that, but Charlottesville is not helping to pay for that service currently. I wonder if there are services out there that would be helpful to our community, but no single locality would choose to fund them alone. But if multiple localities could collaborate, then it would suddenly seem like a great idea. So I'm hoping that's a direction where we can grow in the future, is facilitating more conversations across localities. And then I want to talk a little bit about on-demand transit, which you may have heard of. This is a new service mode. So we've got fixed route, we've got demand response, we've got our commuter buses. On-demand would be a new option. And if you've ever taken a rideshare service like Uber or Lyft, then you know what on-demand is. That's what it is. You are using an app or a website to book a call, book a trip, and it's same day. You figure out when your driver's coming, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd like to offer that to our localities as a service option. And there's a lot of advantages to that. First of all, it's more responsive. You don't have to book a day in advance. You can get a trip same day. And that could be a really good fit for the sort of middle density options. So in a really rural place like Louisa, we wouldn't want to necessarily get a call from one corner of the county and then be like, all right, we'll send a vehicle out right away. And then we get a call on the opposite end and it's like, oh gosh, what do we do now? So there are some rural places where we still need to plan the schedule in advance. But for these middle density options like Crozet or the town of Louisa or whatever little pocket you have, we could put these services and it could be a really good fit. And then if you imagine pairing that with something like fixed route, that we could have these on-demand nodes and then we string them together with the fixed route, that could be a way that we provide some new innovative service options in the future. And another really cool thing is this low operating commitment. When you do a fixed route, you better do a study and figure out that fixed route is going to work, because it's a lot of money to buy the bus. You're going to publish the schedule. You're going to have the driver out there all the time, regardless of whether anyone's riding. With on-demand, you just make the service in the software. And if it's pulling from the same pool of drivers, if you were wrong and there's no demand for it, then there's no trip requests. And so you don't deviate any resources over there. So the cost of experimentation is really low. And I'm really excited to see how that pans out, that we can test new services really quickly and cheaply. If they work out well, we can grow them. If they don't, then we didn't really lose much. But I think to use this successfully, we do need to find ways to incorporate it into land use and transportation planning as a kind of infrastructure. So if we're identifying a growth area where we're going to try to focus some of our development, I think at that moment, that's when we should be figuring out, okay, let's commit to having an on-demand service or a demand response service or whatever needs to be part of that planning. And I'm curious how that would shape our land use and development. So I've got 4 minutes left. I'll probably go a little over, but I want to talk a little bit about customer experience. Some assumptions I'm making is that transit offers some benefits to our community. Congestion, carbon reduction, rural preservation, transportation equity. And whenever somebody chooses transit instead of driving, we're reaping some of these benefits as a community. And then the more they choose to take transit, the more benefit we'll reap. But we may never replace all automobile trips with transit. So those are my assumptions going forward. Now, thinking about customer experience, if you've never heard of that before, here's a quote from the founder of CX Journey. Customer experience is the sum of all the interactions that a customer has with an organization over the life of the relationship with that company or with that brand. In other words, I want to know, how is somebody deciding whether or not they're going to take transit, or whether they're going to drive or walk or take a bike? Customer experience gives us a way to think about that and answer that question. So to help think about customer experience, I would put forward these 3 pillars. The first is education. So does your customer even know how to use transit? If they don't use it, that they can't really move forward. So that's the baseline, is they've got to know that your service exists and how to use it. The second is the cost benefits. So why would they choose to take transit over driving or biking or whatever? This is, I think, the meat of customer experience, is this cost benefit analysis. And then there's a third piece that's a little less tangible, the emotional side. So when you watch a car commercial, they want you to think of that car as part of your identity. There's an emotional play there. So when we think about transit or any other choice, there's an emotional value component that influences whether people would choose to do that or not. And we need to think about that as well. So when we think about transit trips in the context of this framework, we think about riding the bus, and there's a lot of facets of the customer experience that we can start looking at right away. Does the customer know how to pay? Do they know when they need to get off the bus? Are they comfortable while they're riding the bus? Are the chairs comfortable? Or is there a cup holder for their coffee? There's really nothing too small. It's all making a contribution to their experience and whether or not they're going to take transit. Do they feel safe when they're on the bus? There's going to be other people there. Are they going to feel comfortable with those people? But this is really only a small part of the whole transit trip. And so we really need to broaden our perspective and think about, well, before they even get on the bus, they've got to get to the bus stop. They need to know where it is. They need to know, is there going to be shelter there? Am I going to be standing in the sun or the rain or the snow while I wait for the bus? Will I be able to sit down? Is there going to be a trash can or maybe a nearby coffee shop? What kinds of amenities will there be at this bus stop? And then again, will I feel safe? Is this going to be well lit at night? Is it in a part of town where I'm going to feel comfortable? These kinds of questions. If they need to transfer, they're going to wonder if their transfer is on time. Did they miss their transfer? Am I going to have to run to go catch my transfer? And these are all parts of the customer experience. But finally, once they've arrived and gotten off the bus, how far do they need to walk to get to their final destination? If it's a hot day and they're going to break a sweat, am I going to have a shower available for me at work? If I'm taking a transit trip to a shop or a store, will I be able to transport whatever I just bought? So there's a lot of different elements to the customer experience for transit trips. And when you start to compare some of these things to driving, it's no wonder that people choose to drive. Where's my car? Well, it's in the driveway where I left it. When can I leave? Anytime I want. Am I going to be comfortable with the other people on board? Well, it's just me, so hopefully, and so when we start to do these kinds of comparisons, it really becomes clear why more people aren't taking transit and some of the changes that we need to make to this experience to bring more people on board. The challenge is that in a traditional business, you're really responsible for all the parts of your customer experience. You're designing your product, you're marketing your product, you're selling it, you're offering customer support, like everything's in your control. But that's really not the case for transit. Yes, we have the transit providers, we're maintaining the buses, setting the schedules, training our drivers, handling payment, communicating with our riders about service disruptions, but we're not alone. You also have to think about local government. They're defining land use. They're setting what are the A's and B's and how far apart are they from each other. They're regulating urban design to do setbacks and figure out what is the experience to get to the building. They're shaping the public road network. Am I going to have to weave through a bunch of cul-de-sacs in order to get to somebody's house to pick them up? And not to be underestimated, they're funding public transit. So we're relying on local government as our partners for funding. We've got to think about land developers. They're responsible for site development. They decide where the bus stop is going to be placed. Are there going to be sidewalks or trees or awnings that are going to make the experience comfortable walking to or from the bus stop? I like to think about grocery stores. Wegmans in Charlottesville is a great example. If you think about where people park, the spots closest to the door always fill up first. And then you've got a second ring and a third ring. And then you've got those spots all the way in the back that are always empty, except for the day before Thanksgiving. So those are the least desirable spots because people don't want to walk. And then past that, that's where the bus stop is. So those kinds of things are things that are influenced by the land developer. And then last, we've got business owners. So are we putting coffee shops or other placemaking businesses near a transit stop so that while I'm waiting for my bus, I feel like I'm connected to the life in my community? If I'm an employer and I want my employees to be able to take transit to work, am I going to be providing shower facilities in case it's a really hot day and they're breaking a sweat? Or if I'm own a business and I want my customers to feel comfortable taking transit to get to my business, I want to make sure, at Lowe's is a good example. If they're going to buy a bunch of lumber, I want to make sure they can take transit and then rent a truck to take their lumber home, return the truck, and then they could take transit back. So all those kinds of considerations influence the customer experience of taking transit. So there's a lot of challenges here. Distributed ownership over the transit customer experience. I'm not in control of every part of the customer experience of a JAUNT customer, and that's tough. And I don't think we have strong established relationships between all these diverse stakeholders thinking about how are we going to make a compelling customer experience for transit. And in order to do that, we need to have consistent long-range planning and investment between all these stakeholders. The single occupancy automobiles have a huge head start on this. There's already tons of investment done for cars, and that takes the form of parking minimums. Individuals are used to spending thousands of dollars on a car and gas and insurance. All that is just seen as normal. So there's a lot of cultural shift that would need to take place to have this kind of alternative. But I'm hoping that with this in mind, we can shift away from the sort of transit band-aid approach. People will say, oh, we've got this development and there's a lot of traffic. Can we put a bus stop and maybe that will fix it all? And I would say, no, we really need to be thinking about it from a customer experience perspective, because just building a bus stop doesn't mean anybody's going to actually want to ride. And so that's where I think we need to be thinking as planners, because if we're not building transit systems that people want to ride, we're not really doing anything for our community. So that's how I think about building better transit. And I'm only a little bit over, but we can switch over now to some questions and discussion. I hope that was interesting, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
I really enjoyed it. Who has questions? I have a question. Do you get a lot of ridership out of the universities and colleges in the area and the airport, or no?
Yes, the University of Virginia is a huge driver of transit. We don't do as much with the community colleges. So it's mostly UVA. But there are definitely, we try to have lists of who are the biggest businesses and universities, where the biggest trip generators, and keep an eye on that.
Stephen, one question I have is, I'm sure you haven't asked these questions, like some of the questions that you proposed in your presentation, without thinking through them a little bit first. So one of the questions I had is, you talked about, are there ways for multiple jurisdictions to work together to, sort of find those opportunities that will serve multiple purposes? Do you have any thoughts on what that could look like?
Well, I know we've been having some planning initiatives lately around Zion Crossroads. So I would love to hear Louisa and Fluvanna talk about what kinds of transit opportunities exist there. In terms of funding, I think I don't know much about the legalese of it, but maybe some kind of memorandum about what is the funding arrangement going to be, who's going to pay how much of what. I think for all of our services, we want to have some service design standards that should be met. So what should be our minimum passengers per service hour or something else, something like that, that will help us measure, is this service succeeding? Is it getting the ridership that we expect it to? And it may take a little time for people to get used to it and for the service to ramp up. But if it doesn't, we would want to be able to identify that and then reallocate those monies to a different idea that might work better. So those are some of the things that I would think of how to approach that.
Stephen, I have a few questions actually more related to the buses themselves. Do you guys offer storage for bicycles? And then do you have Wi-Fi and outlets on your buses? Just thinking about like customer experience and getting more riders, you know.
Yeah, those are great questions. So when we launched the Crozet Connect in fiscal year 20, that was a big opportunity for us. It was a service that had long been demanded by Albemarle County. And when we did that, we also brought the Buckingham, Livingston, and 29 North routes, which had existed previously. We brought them all under this Connect brand. And we got new buses. We rewrapped the buses. And when we did get those, we invested in USB charging ports. There's Wi-Fi on the buses. All of our Connect buses do have bike racks. There are times when we have not had enough bike capacity. The ones we have only carry two bikes. The buses carry 23 passengers. So if you see any ideas for how to get more bikes on there, we'd love that. But yeah, those kinds of amenities are things that we've tried to look at. And I think they help. I still think that there's a pretty big gap in terms of the comfort of riding a bus compared to driving. It is little things like the seat. Is it comfortable to sit down? You know, we made sure that there were cup holders on our Connect routes, but you know, there's a lot of transit systems that they don't even allow you to have beverages on the bus because they don't want you to spill it and then have to clean it up. And if you've never ridden on a body on chassis bus, which is the majority of JAUNT's vehicles, it's like a Ford chassis that's purchased, and then there's a Virginia company that we work with, and they retrofit it to have you know, a small bus on the chassis. They're noisy. They're really rattly. And it's not a very smooth ride. So I think there's a million different aspects of just the vehicle alone that you could improve to make the transit experience more compelling. But that takes people in transit asking for those things. And if all the transit agencies are just settling because, oh, this is what's available, so I guess we'll get that, then we're never going to be pushing that forward.
Hey, Stephen, this is Douglas from Fluvanna. So quick kind of two-part question. User opportunity. Right now we're at $3 a gallon, over $3. Do you guys factor in like if gas goes up to $4 in a year or two? And what the second part of it is, are your buses gas, diesel, future electric, propane? I mean, what are some of kind of the long-term opportunities for JAUNT to use as fuel sources?
Yeah, so right now, most of what we operate is gasoline. I don't think we would see fares change from a customer perspective if gas prices went up. So that's one of the advantages of public transit, is that it is a service subsidized by public government, and that gives us an opportunity to isolate some of those kinds of fluctuations from the customer. We have a fuel reserve built into our budget to handle the cost, unexpected costs like that. So I don't think those things would impact the user experience directly, and from a fare perspective. We do own a small number of electric vehicles. We've got a couple of staff vehicles, and we have one transit vehicle that is all electric. And we're excited to have that. We are excited to be making a commitment towards green energy. And it will be a cheaper fuel source for us. But there is still some opportunity for growth of the technology in terms of reliability, not only having enough charge, but operating well under all operating conditions, weather particular. And there's a lot of hills in our region. So, you know, your mileage may vary literally when it comes to that electric vehicle. So it remains something we're interested in. But I don't think the vehicle we've invested in already, I don't think that was a total home run for us.
Stephen, what type of service does that electric vehicle serve for Jaunt?
It gets rotated occasionally into our urban service around Charlottesville and Albemarle. That gives us more control over needing to bring it back to charge. There's no on-the-go charging that we do that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any like senior center that has an EV charge and we plug in while we're unloading and loading wheelchairs. It certainly could happen in the future. Unlike a personal automobile, I think it's probably easier to plan around where do people get dropped off for a bus. So I think that is a little bit more predictable, and I think it would be easier to build that infrastructure and know you're going to get a lot of use out of it. You're not going to have a bus charge for 15 minutes and then park for 2 hours taking up that spot, you know. So there are opportunities there. But yeah, we keep it mostly to the urban area.
So does it look like that vehicle is mostly like a morning, late afternoon shift with like a midday charge needed? Yeah.
And if there's more interest in that, I could try to get more information, more specifics on what has our operating range been.
Can you bring pets on board?
We do allow service animals, but I do not think our policy currently allows pets.
Okay, just curious.
I think there was a time in the past where we allowed small pets and then realized we didn't want to get into negotiations with customers about what was small and what was not small.
Are there evening or weekend rides?
That will depend. It changes on a service by service basis. Some services are 7 days a week, some are 5 days a week, some are only 3 days a week, some are 1 day every other week. But if you go on our website, it's got all of the schedules laid out for every service.
Thanks.
Was there another question? Well, I'm 5 minutes over my time, so I will yield the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, with no further questions, we'll roll into the strategic plan.
So that's me. And thank you, Stephen, for that wonderful presentation. So I'm the new staff person for RTAC, and part of our work plan for this year is to do a strategic plan for the committee. And I wanted to talk with you all today about the first steps of that strategic plan and introduce the project. This will also help me serve you as a staff person to understand better what your needs are and how this committee can best meet your needs. So I'll just go over the steps for creating the strategic plan, and then we can talk about the first couple items. So we're going to create a vivid description of what our final destination is, And I think for this committee, it'll be a little different than like a just final destination, but more of like what services we can provide to the community. Determine the steps that we'll take to achieve our vision, and determine how we'll achieve the vision and goals and objectives, and then get buy-in from across the organization regarding the details of the strategic plan, so that being across our community. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about the final destination for this committee, or the kind of goals and objectives of how the committee can serve your areas better.
I mean, I can share. I think probably in Greene at least, our biggest help from the committee is on larger scale planning activities, whether it's staff or even potential grant opportunities to leverage that can assist, and also some of the additional experience that you have working with other small counties, bring some additional information to bear, and anything that enhances that joint knowledge and leverages the staff that we don't have locally are the things that we value the most.
Anybody else?
Can you repeat your questions again?
Oh, yeah, so I'm just kind of trying to get an idea for the vision, for the strategic plan of what the vision for this committee is. So like what goals and objectives do we want to meet? Like the purpose of the committee?
I'm curious about sort of the relationship building side of it. Like if this committee did not exist, where would we all be talking to each other? Like what other alternatives are there? And if there aren't any, then I think that underscores the importance of this committee, just to have a place where we're putting faces to names and getting to build relationships.
I think the answer is we'd only be talking to each other if we had a question that we wanted to find out what other localities are doing to resolve, unfortunately. So I agree with what Stephen's saying, and I also agree with Jim, is that this is a great place for us to bounce ideas off of each other. And I mean, I learned a lot out of the PowerPoint today.
I'd just like to take a moment to reassure Stephen that I will talk to him if he gets lonely.
Thanks, Jim.
This is Douglas from Fluvanna. I would say, Lucinda, that I think it's really important for this group to be involved on a quarterly basis, because the work that we do, or at least where I also used to work in another PDC office that supported us, we had so many diverse needs in the rural areas, and David Cook talked about this earlier at our last meeting about economic development scoring and smart scale, right? Because everything's rural and by conditional use, and or somewhere might be zoned commercial but not have any activity yet. And so with the traffic counts and road diagrams and road geometry and everything that's can be so skewed as opposed to a grid system in urban areas, it's real important for the group to work together. And I'd really like to see going forward more of cross-jurisdictional work in corridors like Fluvanna and Albemarle, and Goochland and Fluvanna, and Buckingham and talking about Buckingham using JAUNT. So, you know, Buckingham and Fluvanna on Route 15. I mean, there's different PDCs that also sometimes need to collaborate with one another if they leave into another area. And I'm glad to see, like, you know, Nelson and the Lynchburg folks on the western side of us. So things like that, it's real helpful.
I think that's a great idea. You know, we could be inviting members of other PDCs to our meeting and vice versa, or we could be reaching out to localities. You know, hey, would you like to join a meeting? You may not be a member of the association, but it doesn't mean that we still don't value you. What's going on? You're a neighbor, but you're not in the PDC, but we like to know what's going on.
That's a great idea.
What about with, like, not just with other PDCs, but any coordination needs with that MPO?
Yeah, Sandy, I would say that I think it'd be helpful sometimes for us to maybe see some of the minutes of the MPOs. I mean, I go and look at them on your website, or hear about it from, you know, our board member and other commissioners and stuff here. But sometimes maybe also inserting Gretchen or Lucinda put in the MPO minutes for us to look at. We might not read them. We might read them page per page. So I think that would be nice, and vice versa. They may want to see some of ours. So sometimes as like Tom and I know that, you know, eventually Fluvanna and Louisa might be in the MPO in the next census count. So like, I think the VDOT reps have told us. So, you know, it's just helpful to kind of keep tracking, following that. So Sandy, that'd be, you know, if they're open for us to not having to hit the website, be great.
I think it's important to make sure we're all headed in the same direction too. Like, I know each locality has unique needs, you know, and a unique vision, but for me personally, it's helpful, you know, to reach out to people in the same region or, you know, in similar localities to make sure that we're keeping up with current regulations and zoning principles and transportation planning and everything like that. You know, especially with all of us having, or most of us having, such limited resources.
Anything else? If there isn't anything else, is part of the strategic plan process is to develop a list of stakeholders that need to be engaged in the strategic planning process. So I wasn't sure if you guys had any ideas about stakeholders that we want to include in the strategic plan. Or is it just this group that are the stakeholders?
I think that it's pretty much this group and any members that aren't in attendance today. I don't know that trying to involve any other members of the community would enhance anything. I assume that the rest of my counterparts would present the information and update their governing bodies about the things that are being discussed and get approvals for anything that are necessary. But I don't see any benefit from bringing more people into the group that aren't really typically involved and don't understand what we're doing to start with.
The only thing I could see adding is that I don't know whether UVA requires in their planning program a studio, group class studio or individual charrette or whatever. If they're working on something regionally that we may not even know that they're working on, we could see that presentation. But you know, I don't know whether those schools are recycling the same projects every third year or something like that. We're going to do another studio on this road or this area. So we'd have to reach out and ask them. I just know what VCU did, so.
Anything else?
I think it might be worth revisiting after we've maybe clarified the mandate of the committee. If we're sure of what we're here to do, that might help us notice somebody who should be here.
One thing I would like to say is that, I mean, we represent the localities, we represent the transportation department and the regional body, and we've got RideShare and JAUNT. I mean, we do have a growing movement of multimodalism going on, and not that I want to there's anybody out there to represent that group, but it would be good if there were advocates that could possibly represent that group that attended these meetings to pursue more bike and pedestrian opportunities throughout the process. And I don't know how we could do that. I mean, we all sort of have that role as part of our job description, but that might be something we might want to think on how we can include that in the future. The other thing is, I know with the adoption of DRPT and the state taking on some of the railroad, there may be some opportunities there to expand for stops in some of the rural areas that currently where those lines go, that could be beneficial to the communities.
Yeah, Chuck mentioned this multimodal movement. It maybe be interesting just to look at the plans across the region and figure out what are the elements that are shared by 50, 60, 80% of everybody here. And that could change year to year as localities revise their comp plans, but that might be an interesting exercise.
Well, I know the MPOs and combining with the city and the county, they're doing a one map project where they're trying to digitize all of their systems into one overall map that shows all of the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And I know the PDC had done a project several years ago on Bike Route 76. So it would be, that might be something we might want to think about expanding to the whole region in the future as a way to sort of track where those are and to identify where the greatest needs are. So those can be part of the transportation need identification.
That's a good point, Chuck. On that note too, just there's a lot of discussion now with these regional trail connections as well, corridors and recreational or transportation related, but I'm seeing that that's taking some movement now.
Yeah, Chuck, this is Douglas in Fluvanna. We just, the last board meeting, we just had the Fluvanna Leadership Development Program. One of the participants in this year's 2021 class, he worked on the Transamerica Bike Route 76 to divert bike traffic off of 15 onto Main Street, which we're doing our TAP grant application with Tom Fitzpatrick on. So, you know, it's going to take some time just to get that one little segment, and then it'll come pop back out over onto Pleasant Grove through our trail system, and then back onto 15. So that one little project right there was a good experience for some of the county residents to go through.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and I know there's a push for the 3-notch trail, so it's called, that runs along the 250 corridor. I know it's been pushed in Albemarle County quite extensively, and we're going to probably look at some of that next year. But I know there's been some discussions about extending it eastward into Fluvanna and Louisa towards Richmond. So I think there's an opportunity there that we can start focusing on where those kind of things are going to work in the more rural areas of the PDC.
Yeah, that's right. We're working with Chris Jensick and Peter Krebs on through Fluvanna, and Goochland to the east of us is doing the same. So eventually one day hook up with the Virginia Capitol Trail.
Something that's been getting attention as well is our rural pavings. I think I mention it every other meeting with y'all, but you know, it's definitely, it's getting more attention towards what is going on in our rural areas and what infrastructure improvements are occurring on these roads. It's really the only type of development in our rural areas that the board, besides outside of major road and intersection improvements, that the board is involved with on these, and it's about paving gravel roads as rural rustics, paving, and there's been a lot of input from the bike community about keeping these roads as gravel, and so this is definitely a good discussion that we're having internally with the county. I think it's definitely something that's going to stay on the radar for a bit. So
Thanks, you guys. I got a lot of good ideas. It sounds like kind of bouncing ideas off of each other and education on new technologies and planning regulations is kind of what I'm seeing in the community. Thanks. I don't know if you have anything else.
Sure, this will I'm provided, but no, I'll be back.
Sometimes like pulling teeth around here. I'll start the roundtable. Don't have anything really to report, so I'll move on to the next one.
Do you want to your screen, Tyler? Maybe just.
Oh, wow. Does anybody else have anything they want to share around the table?
I'll say outside what I just mentioned on the rural pavings, that was approved on several roads. We're looking at how to keep the public more involved in that process. Keep people aware. Some of these roads are petitioned 10 years ago to be paved, and property ownership switches hands, and some property owners are finding out the first time that this road is going to be paved, and we're trying to make more all user involved in this process, all types of users on these roads, on these gravel roads to be paved, if they are to be paved. Something else we just did in collaboration with Greene County, I worked with Alan, I think it's Alan Yost from Economic Development, Jim. And this is 2 years in the making. We were able to come together. This was like the first project I started on, a Virginia byway requests for Route 810, 240 and 810 from Crozet. It's a DCR VDOT designation for aesthetic value, and provides recreational opportunities, natural resource opportunities, scenic views. So this designation, we had a public hearing, VDOT DCR evaluated the road. They recommended it for Virginia designation. So we held a public hearing, and now it's going to the CTB probably in the fall. So that was a rural item that was on my plate this spring.
That actually encompasses Madison County also. So it's a continuous route from Albemarle through Greene and up 230 into Madison.
Right, it's gonna be a complete greenway, a complete byway, Virginia byway from our park entrance where Nelson and Albemarle meet, like 250 Virginia byway, up all the way up. I think it goes to Front Royal. So if like this with these connections for designation.
Also, I'd like to hear, the ideas for topics for our next meetings, if you have any.
Nobody's got any problems?
I
Yeah,
have a
well,
question.
group
Yeah,
about
I'm
it?
sorry. I have a question. And it's kind of the most recently passed legislation. I'm looking at the VACO summary for legislation for transportation. And as we're talking about 3-notch trail, cap trail, things like that. And I know there isn't an answer to this because it kind of went right through the General Assembly underneath all these other safety and but HB 2262 bicycles traffic regulation for port. We do have some concerns with two parts of this. I don't think any of us are experiencing yet, but this fall when we're going to have 2 vehicles abreast on rural roads that are single lane, the bicycle also removes a limitation on riding removes limitation on riding certain vehicles 2 abreast, and then also to allow bicyclists to treat stop signs as yield signs. And this was passed on to the this is Patron Hurst's bill, and it was passed on to the committees of Senate Transportation and the Virginia State Police to look at. Do you all, Chuck or Lucinda or anyone of you all had any recent concerns from anyone in this region? Because all for bicycling, like we just talked about, the Trans-America Bike Plan that we have rides through this part of the county. But I think in September, October, when it's cool, we're going to have some anxious bus drivers and vehicle operators when there's 2 and 3 vehicles abreast on, like, say, Route 53, that's a 55-mile-an-hour zone. So can anyone comment on that, on what happened with that legislation?
I can't comment on that, Douglas, but what I would say is that it might be worth a conversation with David Blunt, our legislative coordinator and liaison here, to see if there's any information that he has. Do you know if this is something that is on your board's radar right now, the elected officials? Is that something that they're concerned with at this point?
Not yet, because it's hot and no one's riding 2 abreast, but I bet you in the end of September when people are riding 2 abreast and school's back in session, and one of our board members is a substitute bus driver, and he also is the driver's ed teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very for bicycles. If I think anyone in our county would be me. But I think that this kind of legislation came through. What we watched is it originally was 2 abreast when it was a 4-lane road, and then it became a 2-lane road and got passed.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a 4-lane road, and you're able to pass in the passing lane, it works. So I'm just throwing it out to the group, and maybe there was some legislation from, the folks that it was only to be in certain areas. I don't know. So thank you.
Doug, I'll tell you, I ride bikes out on the scenic byway we just talked about in several areas. And in practicality, people are so afraid of the new rule that even when you're single file, they won't pass. They'll just ride behind you at 15 miles an hour forever. It doesn't matter if you slow down, wave them past. They're so deathly afraid to not have enough room or to cross all the way over that it's actually made it much more dangerous. And my only other comment is anybody that willingly rides on 53 on a bicycle has a death wish.
Sorry, I got on mute. It is our bicycle lane on 53. Yeah, and they ride it pretty regularly out of the Lake Monticello area. And they come down when they can go downhill. and they're going like 30 miles an hour. And I mean, God bless them, they hit some gravel, but then when they hit the hills, you know, I think that some of this got passed without, you know, there's always bills that get passed that, oh, they made it through and no one really discussed them in committee and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just throwing it out for the good of the group. I'm not saying yay or nay on it. It's just, I know that there will probably be some concerns when it's cooler and people are riding more often, you know, recreationally.
It was definitely, you know, it was the county, Albemarle County, definitely, there was a lot of support for it within the community. And basically just hearing how it provides more of awareness, kind of makes drivers look for bikers. Yeah, it was definitely supported. I think it does help. We have a lot of rural routes in our areas that we're trying to identify how to accommodate. Signage doesn't, you know, we're working with VDOT on signage and maybe some additional shoulders on some paving of roads and stuff. So little by little, I think even with this new law, it definitely helps.
Does anybody have anything else? Any ideas for the next meeting?
I am interested in subdivision roads. Just generally, what other localities are doing, requiring access through other properties in order to subdivide.
Private roads or public roads?
Either really, but private primarily.
Probably a good topic. I mean, I'd be game. I can share what Greene's done. We've recently gone through that. So if we want to make that a topic, I'll prepare a little bit.
I'm okay with that.
I'll add that to the agenda. Thanks.
Well, Stephen, I thank you for the excellent presentation today. And seeing that there are no other members of the public that have joined us, I motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
See ya.
Thank you.